Hey, I think this is a good time to sashay over into the Coen brothers themes.
Well, yeah, I was just about to say that because I think, a place where this kind of connects to skepticism is, I mean, we as generally speaking in the film, though, again, there's the whole framing that calls it in question, but we seem to know what's going on better than the characters do. But it all, starts in that whiteout, it all emerges out of a whiteout, which to me is a kind of symbol of epistemic fog. I mean, we talk about the fog of war, and if you've ever seen that, there's a Swedish film and its American remake, Insomnia, too, where these things happen in fog. And yeah, I think there's this way that a truth is emerging, but it's still, we're in a world full of whiteouts and blindedness.
Yeah, that's good. They're blinded and then they're objectified. If Jean is silenced, she is made invisible by covering her up. She can't speak. She begins as a human subject and is basically rendered an
Yeah.
object.
And he kills
Um,
her because she was using her voice too.
yeah, that's right. He ultimately, which says something about Grimsrud. I think I want to talk about at some point. He seems to have a fear of language or an antipathy towards language, and yeah, it's because Jean won't shut up that he ultimately kills her. Um, but think about the various bodies in this film that who were people and become bodies, and how objectified those bodies often are. We see these bodies being dragged off of the road with the highway cop. We see Wade's body. Well, we don't see him being put in the trunk of a car, but we know that's what happens to him. Carl's body gets fed into a wood chipper. I mean, I think there's this fascinating thing going on with this dichotomy between live people as subjects and people as inert objects. And one of the things about the nature of Grimsrud evil, and if we can go back to that for just a second, is that he's more comfortable with objects. He's not comfortable with people. He wants to reduce people to objects. And when he kills people, I think that's why he's doing it, including Jean. But I think, in a sense, all of these. I was thinking about how Grimsrud avoids language, and Carl, of course, uses language. So
Yeah,
even in that scene where they get pulled over, Carl tries to solve the problem with language by talking his way
right.
through it. And Grimsrud doesn't say a word. He just takes the gun and shoots the guy, right? That's his solution.
And then he's like, "You're so smooth, smooth."
Yeah, that's right. You'll
He's
take
like
care of it.
mocking
Or,
language.
yeah, that's right. Whenever he uses language, it's to hurt somebody. It's almost no other reason. And of course, when he kills Carl himself later on, there's a very brief argument about the car, but very little. He doesn't try hard to persuade Carl that he's right
No.
or anything. He makes one attempt. Carl ignores him, so he picks up the axe. That's a solution to everything. He's going to reduce Carl to an object, and then of course he's got these two objects: the body of Jean and the body of Carl that he has to do something with, and we see what he's doing, at least with the body of Carl.
The other thing he expresses is an Aristotelian base appetite when he's, I need pancakes, right? So he's either expressing his dislike of someone or indifference, or he's expressing this kind of need. Like he
That's
needs
right.
pancakes right
Or, or,
then.
or he needs unguent. Yes,
He
that
needs unguent. Yes.
expressing need. Yeah, that's good.
Which is
You're right.
interesting because as soon as he gets his hand bitten, he just says, I need unguent, which is so weird.
It's so
Like,
weird.
wouldn't you think of that later on, like in the middle of this tussle,
I
and you're
mean,
thinking,
never having kidnapped anyone myself, I don't really know what I'd be thinking, but maybe it's a sign of how self-focused he is in a sense. Like he only thinks about his needs first, even
right.
before. I don't know. It's an interesting question. Yeah, why does he need the
It's
unguent
true.
right away?
I
But
mean, it's funny. Maybe that's, but
It's
it's
funny.
that's
funny.
the
Yeah,
other thing.
I
it
mean, I
is.
read it too. Is like he had never had any doubt they were going to get her. It was just like it
That's
wasn't a
true.
question.
Yeah, that's right. He's not worried about it. He knows it's a foregone conclusion, so he can take the time to get the unguent if he wants. That makes sense.
Nihilism is another Coen Brothers theme I think we might want to discuss. I mean, kind of compare to me that road between the cities and the towns, where they're out there. That's kind of space of nihilism, the empty landscape, the and I think as we talked about before, there's like a void to that, and there's the void Marge peers into in the car, the dark void there, and so I think there's that, and then of course, if Grimsrud is nothing, but he's certainly a nihilist. There's he has no values whatsoever, and same with Jerry. I mean, Jerry's a different kind of nihilism, but this what Marge is really standing up against is not just lies and violence and unlawfulness, but also the sort of nihilism of that's come to her community.
And Peter Stormare is going to appear as a nihilist in a later film as
I
well.
know, right?
Yeah, but what's great, of course, is in this film he's an authentic nihilist, and he would never say so. He probably doesn't even know the word. Whereas in The Big Lebowski, he's going to be a fake nihilist and a self-proclaimed nihilist. He says, "Oh, I'm a nihilist," but he's actually really not. He actually cares about stuff in that film.
Showalter might have said it's not fair if
Right.
I don't get my share of the car, but like he doesn't give a shit about it.
No, he really doesn't care about any of that. Yeah. The nihilism, the use, you mentioned the whiteout and so on, the use of the snow, the big spaces and stuff. It's just wonderful visual symbols for nihilism in this film. They do such a nice job of setting this and of course, when we think about nihilism in film, we so often think about film noir and stuff like that, and this is just the opposite in so many ways. It's white rather than black.
Yeah.
It's set in the middle of the country rather than LA or New York or someplace where you'd expect a noir to be set. They reverse the polarity on so many things, and yet in a way I think that's part of the underlying power of the film. Look, nihilism's here too. You can't escape it by fleeing the coast and going
That's
to the
right.
heartland or something like
Yeah.
that. It's everywhere. Marge and Norm are in their own little secure house hoping that it's secure, but they could be like the Lundegards. The nihilism could break through the door and just come in anytime. It's out
Right.
there, and
I
there's
had
nowhere you can go to get away
a
from it.
contrast that I think you'll agree with is that, I mean, consider how much things have changed since, I guess, 1960s with Mayberry. So you've got another small town, cop there, Andy Griffith, but it's not surrounded by the nihilism that you get here. I mean, this town is surrounded by, the void, and in a way that Mayberry just wasn't, or at least on the surface wasn't anyway, I guess you could say. But I think that marks a shift in our culture and the way we understand ourselves from the days of Mayberry to the days of Fargo.
I think that's true. So one of my big themes, of course, in the Coen Brothers films, I believe I've talked about it every time so far because it's always there, is this idea of violating boundaries and crossing borders. There are several in this film that are being violated and crossed. I think the truth-fiction boundary being a big one that we've already discussed. But, the film itself is in some sense violating that border. We've got these great visual depictions of violating borders, most specifically, of course, the kidnapping scene where he breaks through the patio door and comes into their secure home. And as often in their films, we've noticed before how many home invasions there are in these films and how often that is connected with this theme. But then I think in this other, and I mentioned this sort of a live versus death or subject versus object boundary that gets violated a lot in this film. But I think that in this other way too, the Coens love to sort of mash their genres together, or take a character who belongs in one sort of film and put them somewhere else, and that's a type of boundary violation too. So you take a Marge who feels like she would belong in somewhere more like Mayberry or something like that, and you put her in the middle of this terrible plot with all these truly despicable, evil people and this really gruesome violence at times. It's this wonderful sort of collision, and so much of the energy I think comes from that. But I really feel like this again is this great. The Coens just love genres because they can screw around with them essentially, and they're doing. It's not as overt here as in some of the films we've seen up to this point, but I still think they're doing it. And I think in particular, just the character of Marge, who is so. It's not just that she feels a bit out of place in this film, it's that she sort of feels out of place in the Coen universe. She doesn't really seem like a Coen character. And that's part of what's so interesting about her. You take someone like her, imagine Andy Griffith sitting in the Prowler with Grimswood behind him, face the two of them off. Like, that's a crazy combination. They don't seem to belong in the same universe. And yet they do it because it's our universe. It's the only one there is.
Tell me how you read the kind of repetition or the cycle that goes there, because it starts with, the Sierra being towed by Lunsgren in the beginning out of the white emptiness, and then at the end we have another kind of pulling of cars through that same space. I mean, has order been destroyed? Because I mean, one way you could look at the killing of the cop in the beginning is like an assertion of nihilism. So the cop is trying to enforce law, right? In the face of Grimsred, no, that's a lawless space, and it will bite you if you try to impose that nihilism bites back, but by the end, it seems like nihilism has been conquered, or that nihilistic space has been, mastered by Marge and her virtue and her intelligence.
I wouldn't say that nihilism has been conquered, or I think in the last scene, Marge is coming to a realization that the world is nihilistic, and she's fearful for her future, for her baby's future. The Coens do this in other films where at the end, it's this idea that the world is really a much more nihilistic and kind of fucked up place, and we are huddled with the things that we value, our husband, our child, our son, or whoever we're with at the end of the film. And so there's this notion that the world out there is, if not to be feared, to be seen with eyes wide open. But when you do that, you realize that you need to sort of cherish your shit, as Brad Pitt would say. You
Yeah.
need to cherish your husband, or in Tom Bell, his relationship with his wife, or so. Yeah. So
But you have to say there's like a provisional victory, wouldn't you say? Because like Shigor gets away, and like, but here Grimswood, he's in the back of the Prowler, he's going to jail. And there is that contrast between what's happening on that road from the first to the last, scenes.
yeah,
But I agree with you about the way once they're in the bed there at the end, she's not entirely sure. But I mean, there's some kind of, she's had at least a provisional victory. I don't know, temporary victory.
Here's what and I want to come back to that scene in the bed too, because I've thought about it. But here's what I want to say about that. There's a clear distinction in the Coen filmography, mostly clear distinction, between the films that are set in a just universe, which are very few, and the films that are set in an unjust universe, where things don't resolve at the end and people don't get what they deserve and so on. And Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which we'll get to before too long, is one of the very few that are clearly set in a just universe. Everybody really gets what they deserve. But it's a fantasy. That's the whole point, right? We don't believe it. Fargo looks to be, in a lot of ways, one of those as well, because the evildoers either are killed or they're arrested and so on, right? And that's sort of the American idea of justice and of, setting the universe back to, its state, you've restored it, etc., But of course, I've argued about a number of their films, including Raising Arizona and The Hudsucker Proxy, that one of the things the Coens like to do is to give us a movie that can be read two different ways, in a sort of a happy way and in a sort of a tragic way. And so in Raising Arizona, again, it depends on, whether we think that dream that he has comes true. We get the happy ending, but it's in his head. It's in a dream. We don't know if any of it's real or not. And The Hudsucker Proxy we talked about last time, also kind of a dream or something. It's literally unbelievable. What we see on the surface is happy, but what's really happening is very tragic. I think that what's happening in Fargo is something like that. It's not that the surface is deceptive here. We see what happens. It's not that. I think we also have a tendency to trivialize or be a little bit naive about our interpretation of what happens until we reflect on it. So we have, and again, this goes back to how they're trying to get us to be wary of traditional narrative structures. The traditional narrative structure of a film like this is the bad guys are brought to justice and everything's okay. And the first time we see the film, the easy way to read it is that we feel that way, right? Then my experience, at least, is I start to think about it. I see it again. I'm reflecting on it. I start to think about Jean. I start to think about, the people that kidnapped Jean, they were brought to justice. So that means everything is okay, right? Well, no, she's still dead. All those innocent people who died are still dead. They're not coming back. There's a sense in which the entire genre falsifies the reality of things by suggesting to us. And I think this is very important because in later films like True Grit especially, we're going to get stories about people who accept these stories and act on the basis of them, where Maddie thinks she can set the universe right and avenge her father's death by killing the killer or whatever, right? And it just doesn't work. It never works is what they're trying to say.
But you wouldn't want to say that Marge is wasting her time, though.
Oh, no, it's important that these people be stopped. I mean, otherwise they're going to kill again, right? We can help future people. I'm not saying there's no value in doing this, but what I'm saying is, and what I think they want us to think, but I'm speculating for sure, is that it's a mistake to think that the kind of justice we achieve by doing that is some sort of restoration to the state that we were in before, and that there's no tragic element, that doing the right thing and catching the bad guys and stuff can avoid tragedy. I think the Coens have a very tragic view of the universe. The fact is these people aren't coming back. And I think that our tendency, and this is certainly the way I read the film the first time I saw it, our tendency to feel good about the end, I think justice has been done, everything is good, it is related to Grimsrud and Showalter's inability to see Jean, the fact that she's invisible to them. We just kind of forget about her, right? You don't even think that much about her, especially after the first time you watch the film. She's barely in the movie.
Which is a kind of a critique of the audience in a way, too.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're supposed to stop and say, wait, what about her? What about that poor woman, the terrible things that happened to her, right? We shouldn't be feeling good about this film, the end of this film in any way. So I think it's very complex.
I want Troy. I just want to circle back to something I was thinking about. I agree about the Coens subverting the film noir genre by moving it into the film blanc, which is like the white, bright middle America, and there's no femme fatale. The woman is so there's this subversion, and that got me thinking. Another film that I was thinking this theme that the Coens subvert is. I remember when I saw Ridley Scott's Alien, which Alien basically took the horror genre and moved it into outer space. And that was part of the power of that film. And I think that there's a similar thing where the Coens are going, let's take this genre and move it into somewhere where it's never been put before, as far as I know. And that's part of the power of the film is, and there are these other tropes like Deliverance, this kind of fear of, the city folk fear, like when you get to the outside the city, what used to be bucolic and idyllic becomes fucking scary, right? Or what's that, the Blair Witch, right? So there's this theme that, wait, in middle America, this horrible shit's going on. So anyway, I love
definitely.
that. I love that film noir being moved to the light, right? It's an interesting move.
Robert, I'm so glad you brought up Alien, because this is going to give me a chance to say the thing I wanted to say about the end of the film in the bedroom with Marge. And I'm going to make a connection here that may strike many people as crazy. But I'm thinking about Alien and the way one of the things that makes that film truly horrifying is the nature of the alien beast, which of course implants its young in humans. Yeah. Right. It basically impregnates, unsuspecting human beings, and so that they then give a violent birth to it later on. I was thinking about that scene again with Marge at the end, feeling the anxiety. And the way I framed it earlier, which I think certainly has something to it, is that she, having been through this encounter with Grimswood, with true evil, has now developed for maybe the first time a real anxiety about the nature of the world that she's bringing this child into. But I think maybe what I missed, or what I wanted to add now, is that, and I'm thinking of, there's a little scene goes by very quickly earlier on where they're in bed watching TV, as they sometimes are, and they're watching a nature documentary or something, and there's this funny look on her face. She does look a little concerned. And the line you hear from the documentary is, "Here it is throwing off the larval envelope." So you get the sense there that she's got a little bit of anxiety about giving birth. And somehow I connected that.
Well, it's something evil that's being born, that right? I mean, it's another predator.
Right. I was thinking about the fact that, again, Jean Lundegaard, she thinks this threat is coming from outside, but it's really coming from within the house. It's Jerry, it's her husband, that's the real source of the threat. So it's an enemy within sort of trope. And I realized that Marge at the end isn't just worried about the outside threats and protecting her child to be from them, although she is. She's also worried about that child, right? What if he turns out to be a Grimsrud or a Lundegaard or something? Like, she doesn't know who this. Now she knows people in a way she didn't before. She understands evil. She doesn't know the why it happens and where it comes from. Her child could turn out to be one of those. And that, I think, in a way, is even more frightening. The idea that, I have to protect from external threats is frightening enough, but the idea that you might be growing evil inside you is just terrifying. So that, I think, is really where the film ends. Both of those anxieties are going on with her.
If I could add to that, I mean, I think he's ambiguous, but I mean, Scotty fits right into that narrative, because Scotty's a bit of an asshole. I mean, he is worried about his mother, but you do wonder, what's this kid going to grow up to be, having come out of this horror show? And
he's going to grow up to be Jerry.
He might be. Yeah, he might be on the way to be Jerry.
That's the horror of it. That's his future, is Jerry.
Yeah. Or world famous accordion player. I mean, that's possible.
That's right. I mean, he might learn.
It's that disparity that concerns me, Peter. I got to say,
yeah. And it's also, the idea of the mother. I mean, the mother has this power, as a way of resisting. She's a source of care traditionally, and hope in pregnancy, if nothing but except hope. But like, here we're counting on this mother, and like, Marge, are you up to it? It's going to be a challenge. Right.
All these criminals have mothers.
There also is this contrast. We have to talk about it more when we get, towards the end with Tom and No Country and all that. But at the end, I felt like he was just like, maybe it's not all worth it. I mean, I think he might have been much more entirely dispirited than her. But there does seem to be, even in the blood symbol, there's like a real darkness too. So I don't know if there's like a trajectory of development across their films or not. I mean, just based on what we've seen so far, does this mark a change from, say, Blood Symbol, the way this ends compared to the way that one ends? or not?
I mean, there seems to be more hope, but I mean, look, the end of Blood Simple is pretty dark, so I don't know.
Pretty dark.
Yeah, that's a pretty dark ending. Even for the Coen brothers, it's pretty dark. So yeah, there seems to, in this film at least, there's the spark, with the child, and this is going to be echoed later
With
in
Lebowski. Yeah,
And,
which is hopeful.
But Troy, if I could just go back quickly to the thing about Alien and the connection between the child, and also, I think you're dead on about the anxiety of bringing this child, this being into the world, and the uncertainty of what is this child going to be, right? And sure, the best intentions of Marge and Norm to raise their kid to be a good person, but there's no guarantee. I mean, the child could turn out to be a Carl for all we know, right? So that fear, and that got me thinking about Rosemary's Baby. So now we have the clear case of Rosemary carrying this thing, the Antichrist, and the interesting, at least I always found the most interesting thing, this anti-Madonna, the maternal instinct. At the end of the film, she decides to nurture the Antichrist, right? So the instinct to care for this demon is it overwhelms even justice and morality and everything. So anyway, I just thought that when you mentioned Marge, the image of Rosemary with that baby and all the people around, and how she just says, "Fuck it, it's my kid." It doesn't matter that he's going to destroy the earth. But anyway,
That's a nice comparison. That's great. I mean,
Well, we need to compare Raising Arizona too, because you get the kids. Glenn and Dot's kids are kind of like not looking so promising there, and but then you have and that's Frances McDormand again. Like, is she going to give birth to those kids, or there's going to be something else? But also, that's an effort to establish the classic family that's perverse and is only really fixed by restoring the Arizonas to their natural place in a way. And of course, we know we had a nice conversation, I think, about Leonard Smalls and his problematic childhood. So, I mean, what contrast do you see between the way children are presented there and here?
that's really interesting. And of course, the mother is a cop in both cases, which I hadn't
She's a
thought
cop in
about.
both cases, right?
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, Peter, what are these kids getting up to at McDonald's? They're not drinking milkshakes, I assure
They're
you.
not drinking milkshakes. Exactly right.
I love that
See,
line.
Wade knows.
Wade, everyone should be listening to Wade, man. He's on it. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll have to think more about that. There is a kind of a naivete in a way in Raising Arizona. There's this sort of assumption that, of course, family life will be wonderful and a panacea, which the characters share. And
Dreamy
I don't,
end.
yes,
With children in it, right?
And again, I think we're supposed to take a more potentially skeptical line, that we hope that for them, but we don't necessarily believe that they're going to, or we certainly don't know for sure they will.
Yeah.
I think Fargo brings that sort of not knowing more out into the open and really kind of pushes it and makes us feel it at the end. This world is not one where you can ever know what's going to happen. You can't be, and what kind of a person knowing that, would take such a gamble as to have a kid and bring somebody into it? No reasonable person would do that, right? And maybe Marge is sort of starting to think that way at this point. Of course, now it's too late. But
see, and I think that ties in with my concerns about truth a little bit, because look, they're so good at challenging or even undermining the meta narratives, the narratives about family, the narratives about justice, the old stories about defeating evil and restoring order. And that would have to be about truth too. I don't know. Aren't they challenging those old meta narratives too? Why are we going to hang on to the meta narrative of truth? We're going to let go of the American dream and family and
see, my position would be, the problem with those meta narratives is that they obscure the truth. They're not true. Right? It's just not true that if you work hard in America, you'll definitely succeed, and etc. We could go through them all one by one, and so each one isn't true.
So you won't let go of that third one. I mean, it's truth, justice, in the American way. But you're
out of my cold, dead hands, Peter
Fossil.
Fossil.
That's great. I bless that.
One of the Coen themes, I call it the sorcerer's apprentice phenomenon, which is you take an action and then shit goes out of your control and things go haywire and sideways, and this is a theme that Coen brothers love, which is you just make this one little decision and it wrecks the world for you and everyone who's associated with you. So Jerry's moronic decision to set up this kidnapping, again, it goes out of control. It's deeply resonating when we see these themes of people making decisions, and then they, it's sort of like you have this it's kind of counterfactual where you're like, if only he hadn't done that. I think it elicits a strong emotional reaction, and the Coens I think they love that. They love playing on that. We're going to have him do something, and you're going to be going, God damn it, why did you do that? But that's the story is built on that, on those little, quote, little decisions. So I just think they love this kind of Sorcerer's Apprentice theme that shit gets out of control.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course with Jerry here, this brings out one aspect of his moral character and beliefs, which is he's got this view about good intentions, that look, I never meant anyone to come to harm, so I'm innocent. I didn't really do this, right? I'm not responsible because my intentions were good, and I wanted a no rough stuff kind of deal. And he hasn't gotten to that sort of stage of maturity where you realize that actions have unanticipated consequences, and so you can still be responsible even if they don't work out the way you think they're going to.
What do you make of the fact that the money is still out there with the ice scraper?
Well, it's only out there until the spring comes.
Exactly.
Someone's
True. Somebody's going to. That's
is
right.
Coming, right?
Yes. Yeah. This is not permanently lost, but it certainly struck me how often in Coen films, Robert and I had a brief conversation or exchange about this, how often there is a bag of money, and how often that bag of money at some point gets tossed into the landscape or dropped into the landscape. I mean, it happens here, it happens in Lebowski, though of course there's no real money in the bag in Lebowski, but still, it happens in No Country for Old Men. I feel like there's at least one more.
Well, we were talking about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And
yes, I don't know what happens to the money.
Fly. I don't know, but in that
some of it flies out the window. That's true. So it ends up in the landscape too, because the satchel's open and it's just blowing out of the car. That's right.
Yeah.
So at least some of it ends up out there. Oh, and there's one in Hail Caesar, which I think gets dropped into the ocean, doesn't it? So if I'm remembering correctly,
a lot of that money's in cars, but not right, or at least modes of transportation.
Yeah. A lot of ties to vehicles, bags of money
money's
disappearing, being dropped in. And presumably in No Country, the bag of money is recovered too. Sugar tells us that he's going to go get it and he knows where it is. We don't actually see him do it, but my sense is that he succeeds because that's the kind of guy he is.
The money's
so
not
some of these
there.
are recovered and some of them are not. And some of them, like Lebowski, where the money was never even there to begin with. So, but yeah, there's a lot of that in their films. It's this recurring motif that I find myself rather fascinated by.
What do you say we move on to talk about any music or soundtrack?
Oh, no, wait. I have not had the chance yet to talk about my Coen gun theory.
Oh, my gosh.
As applied to this film.
The gun theory.
Or as I've now come to call it, because I think this theory has now received enough corroboration, I'm going to call it the Coen gun rule. And the rule is, as faithful listeners will recall, that in a Coen Brothers film, every time a character uses a gun, which usually means fires, but maybe not necessarily, that action reveals something very deep about their character and who they really are, which I think clearly is the case in this film. Let me start with a couple of the side instances before I get to the main ones. Wade, first of all, Wade Gustafson, has got a gun. He carries it on his way to meet the kidnappers. He practices it with it in the car. I rewatched this sequence. Even as he's practicing, you can tell he's not very good with it. He's kind of slow getting it out. You're looking at that thinking, look, unless those guys aren't armed, there's no way this is going to work out for him. And sure enough, he gets there. He confronts Carl, who shows up. Carl's mad because it was supposed to be Jerry, not him. Wade goes to get his gun, and he's so slow taking it out. It's as if, and this is totally Wade, right? Wade has this image of himself that he seems to have gotten, as I think we've said, from movies and TV shows. He's like a Dirty Harry or a Clint Eastwood sheriff or something. He's going to ride in there and confront the evildoers and tell them what's right. And it's as if they're going to sort of stand there and wait for him to do it. Like, give him the chance to draw his pistol. Of course not. So he just gets shot before he can even get a shot off himself. Carl shoots him.
Do you think there's a connection there between Walter and is there no ransom, no money?
Oh,
no,
yeah,
no hostage, no
Walter
money.
and Lebowski, and there's a similar
Gene,
kind of no Gene, no money. That's right. Yeah, where's my daughter? Yes, there is a kind of a I'm going to stick by the rules, and it's because he expects the kidnappers to play by those rules that he fails, and he thinks he's going to succeed. Yeah, that's right. They're just going to do what it takes. I mean, he has no idea, no conception of what evil is and how that works. So of course he gets shot, but he does manage to shoot his gun, right? He does manage to shoot Carl, though he doesn't kill him. He shoots him very painfully through the jaw. So it's not a kill shot. But it is something. He shoots the gun once. And then, of course, he himself gets shot multiple times, which I'll come back to because that's Carl. Jerry, the other one to mention here, of course, has no gun because the nature of his evil, as we talked about, is bureaucratic evil. He doesn't pull the trigger on anyone himself. He just gives orders and hires people to carry out his bidding. Not that he knows what he's doing, but again, as we said, he's a little Eichmann in a lot of ways. So the others, the interesting ones, the really interesting ones, right? Grimswood, Marge, and Showalter. Grimswood, of course, is completely methodical and cold. I believe that every shot that he makes is a kill shot. Completely indifferent, no empathy. His intent every time is to kill. His intent is to end someone's life, which separates him from Marge. Because, of course, in a lot of ways, Marge is otherwise similar in the use of guns. She's also very competent. Not every shot by her is a kill shot, but that's partly intentional. However, it's true that the first time she fires at Grimswood, she misses completely. But,
Exactly.
but not that she's incompetent. It's a hard shot. He's running across the ice as a big distance, and she's totally calm, right? She knows she can just shoot again. So she misses. She's not, perhaps as skilled or whatever as Grimswood, but also, on the other hand, not only does she hit him with the second shot, she hits him in the leg, which is presumably what she intended, right? That's pretty darn good. I mean, I'm pretty impressed with that shooting. So unlike Grimswood, again, both of them very competent with their weapons.
Could have been luck.
Grimswood,
I don't know. Yeah.
It could have been luck. I don't feel like we're meant to read it that way. I feel like it's supposed to reflect on her.
It's because she missed the first one, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She does miss the first. I think in a way that's important. They don't want to show her as this sort of super heroic character, right?
Yeah, because I was a little bit like, I'm glad she's not as familiar with guns as Grimswood.
Yeah, no, it's good, exactly. But she's still good with them, but she doesn't want to use them to end anyone's life. And in fact, I want to say that Grimswood uses his gun to take people out of the world, essentially, to remove them. Whereas she's doing the opposite. She's bringing him back, right? He's been hiding. He's left society. She's going to bring him back in a way, reintegrate him into society, at least in as much as putting him in prison. But maybe there might be an idea of rehabilitation or restorative justice, right? She might believe in that. Who knows? I doubt that's going to work with him, but, she might have that idea. So I think opposite intentions, but similar levels of competence. And then Carl, of course, Carl Showalter, ends up firing a lot, though it takes him a while to get into it. But once he starts, he can't stop shooting people. The encounter with Wade is probably the one where he most reveals his character. And what I want to say about Carl with his gun is, A, he's not nearly as intentional or deliberate as either Marge or Grimswood. And B, and this goes back to what I was saying about the difference between him and Grimswood in terms of language, that Grimswood hates language and doesn't like to speak and wants to silence people. I think Carl, who loves language, is using his gun as a means of expression. He uses it to express himself. When he gets angry and he can't express himself through words because he's not that articulate, he shoots somebody. So when he shoots Wade, it's partly practical, obviously, to take the money, etc. It's also because he's so fucking pissed off that this guy showed up and that wasn't the plan. He's so angry.
He's outraged that somebody shot back.
Well, and then he gets angry because it shoots him back, right? Which is even better. So he's angry that the plan, they didn't listen to him. It was supposed to be Jerry. He shows that by shooting him. Then he gets shot, and then he becomes even angrier. And watching this sequence, you see that he then shoots several times. The first one just sort of inadvertent. When he gets shot, his gun goes off again. He doesn't even intend that one. So he's totally, out of control of his weapon. But then he takes it and he empties the cartridge on Wade, right? He shoots him 6 times or whatever. Totally uselessly. By that point, obviously, Wade is dead. There's no point. He's just expressing himself. His anger is just running away with him. That's all he is.
That both he and Wade, the gun is a phallus for them. It's trying to assert their power.
Yes,
exactly. Wade is the guy who wants to be in control of time. He can't stand that he's not in control. He's going to assert his control and his mastery of the situation with just with his commanding presence, which works on Jerry, but it's not going to work on Carl. But then that he'll get his gun going. But with the opposite with Carl, he wants authority. He wants people to obey. He wants some people to listen to him, and he has. It never happens.
No, he can't even get the waiter's attention in the restaurant. He's so pathetic. No, I think you're right, and that's part of what makes that scene, the confrontation between the two of them, so delicious. It's these two diminished men,
two phalluses,
who are using their and of course, like the earlier car chase where Grimswood is chasing down the two witnesses, to the initial shooting. it's filmed in a way that sort of subverts the overall, the way we expect to see these things with the excitement, and we expect gun battles and stuff to be sort of like a ballet type, and physically the people are diving and,
Yeah.
it's incredible to watch. And this is just two people who aren't even moving that much. They're sort of standing there in the snow and shooting each other, and the Wade slowly falls. He's wearing that ridiculous, warm winter coat, with the feathers sort of come out of the bullet hole after he gets shot. It's a delicious sequence in a way. If you think of Fargo as built on the model of the Western, I don't think we've even mentioned that, but in a lot of ways it's
Oh,
structured
yeah.
like a Western. This would be like a classic Western show-off, except again, it's not filmed that way at all. It's filmed as something completely different. It doesn't play out that way. And yet it's much more believable. And, violence in real life is probably much more like this more often than not.
What I was going to ask you was, I mean, there was a part of me that's like, Wade had it coming. I mean, this is a
Hmm.
guy who, he just pisses you off with his haughty patriarchal, humiliating, behavior. And you're thinking like, yeah, you think you're so big and powerful. Look at even like a schmuck like Carl Showalter takes you down. You think you're going to come in there and assert your authority and get your daughter back and keep the money and whatever have you. Like, no, you're in a way you asked for it by going there and behaving this way. It's like in a way the cosmic justice of that kind of patriarch, but at the hand of a would-be patriarch too. But there was a part of me that, and maybe I should feel guilty about this, but it's like you had it coming, you asshole. I don't know.
I think this circles back to the issue about appearance versus reality and TV and truth, because Wade, his image of himself as this kind of Dirty Harry character, it's all fed to him by media, he thinks I'm going to show up there. And
Yeah,
as you mentioned, he's even rehearsing his lines, right?
right. As Jerry did too, right? Remember?
As Jerry,
Yeah,
Jerry
both of them are
does too.
theatrical. They both rehearse before these things. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a great connection.
So Wade is thinking as you mentioned, I'm like Dirty Harry, when the reality of it is, as we said, shit goes sideways that you don't anticipate. And this connects to something, Troy, you and I had spoken about, a couple of things. Well, first of all, let me say, here's an argument for why I think that Marge is definitely she's not intending to kill him. She's intending to kind of hit him in the leg because number one, when she takes out her weapon, she's aiming, right? And what she could have done is she could have just taken out her weapon and gone bam, 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 right? And just try to hit him as police in these videos, these kill
True.
videos,
Yeah.
right? So she doesn't do that. She goes bam, and then she aims again, right? So I think she isn't trying to kill him. But Troy had mentioned Gare's killing, but I'll let you talk about that. But when Carl shoots Wade in that parking lot, the sound of the gun, the way the gun goes off, it's the most chilling and realistic. It's like when he's going boom, 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 I'm like, holy shit. Getting shot by a gun is fucking horrible. It was a certain kind of sound, and the way that they made the gun go off was scarily, quote, realistic to me. I just remember seeing that, and even when I rewatched it, thinking, holy shit, that is a serious gun that he's got there. And usually guns in movies are like, pew, pew, but this, if you watch that scene, it's really scary. Like Wade is being destroyed. He's being torn apart. And, but Troy, you had a really good point about the Gare's shooting of his, the chilling aspect of his killing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I want to comment first on what you were just saying about the shooting of Wade, because I think that this connects with the fiction truth thing again. The one thing that happens frequently throughout this film is that characters in one way or another are confronted with reality, and they either sort of embrace it or they flee from it. So Jerry always flees from it. He can't confront reality at all. He's incapable. There's moments when he comes close, like when Stan says to him, "What about Scotty?" He sort of registers it for a moment, and then he moves on. That's as close as he gets. I think in this moment, and this conversation's interesting. How it's suggesting there's some commonalities between Wade and Jerry, but in certain ways, they both have these images of themselves. Jerry, I think, would be Wade if he had the chance. If he got a lucky break and got in that position, that's who he would be. They both rehearse their performances beforehand because they have these images they want to project to people, and they both see themselves as being in ways they're absolutely not, and they're aspiring to a kind of masculine power which Wade largely possesses, but only because of his money, not because of anything inherent to him. And which Jerry wants and can't get, but he's been trying so hard for all these schemes and stuff. So Wade is on his way to this thing, and he's in his car, and he's rehearsing, putting on his little performance and stuff. He's got it all played out in his mind how it's going to go, and then he gets there, and he gets shot. And probably for the first time in his life, or at least for the first time in many years, he is confronted with reality, right? This is real. And I think that gunshot is so loud in part because it's meant to almost break through the movie and get to us that way, right? Like, oh, this guy really just got shot. Because that's what Wade's thinking, right? Holy shit, I just got shot. And so he's, and that's not a reality you can flee from, right? You can't be Jerry Lundegaard and say, I'm just going to ignore that. You've just been shot. You're going to die, right? That's reality as much as reality gets. And then interestingly, Carl has sort of a somewhat related reaction when he gets shot, right? Like, he can't believe the guy shot him back, which is such a great indication, again, of Carl's character and how he's so one-sided, that Carl is capable of moral outrage, but only on behalf of himself, not on behalf of anybody else. So the idea that somebody else would shoot him is just so offensive to his view of the world, and makes him angry, right? But again, he's just been confronted with reality. This is the reality. A bullet just went through you, man. That's what just happened. That's real. It's as real as it gets. So, we were talking earlier about how when I first saw Fargo, and I remembered this, I saw it when it came out, in the theater. It blew me away. I remember very distinctly thinking that it was the first time in some years I had seen violence in a movie that felt to me like real violence in some sense and got to me that way. And in particular for me, the first scene that did it, and maybe most powerfully, was the one where Grimswood, after the car chase, where the car he's been chasing is off the road, it's lying upside down. He shoots the guy in the field, and then he just walks up to the car, and the girl is inside the car. It's so cold what he does. And just watching him do, and it felt so real to me. It was chilling. It was, and if you remember, it's a brilliant, I think they wanted it to have that feeling. So there's a truth fiction thing going on, right? We're watching this movie that on some level we're experiencing as fictional, even if we think it's true. And then this violence happened. And we've been laughing at stuff because funny stuff is happening. These two guys, it's like a buddy movie. These two guys are funny. And then this piece of violence happens, even more than the shooting of the cop for some reason, the shooting of the girl in the car. It just, for me.
Definitely. Even though it was really that they hyped it up with the pink and all that, but I also I don't know, but if I felt a little bit of twinge of, I mean, I understand it in a way, but that kid's running and leaving his girlfriend there,
I know, it's you got to wonder about that.
Coward.
I know,
I mean,
although probably I do the same, but no, I hear what you're saying. I know. But I think that shot in both senses is stunning. And then, of course, if you'll recall, immediately at that moment, it cuts to black, right? And there's this pretty long pause before then the movie fades back in. And of course, that's when Marge enters. It takes us to the extremity of evil and violence.
Well, they're getting absorbed by the black, right? I mean, so the car, you can see the tail lights, and then they go to black. They're gone, And then he gets up there. Oh, there went with some lights again, but then the guy's running out into the blackness. Grimswood is so ferocious. The blackness is preferable to to dealing with him.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, good
yeah.
point.
That's, of course, the point where Marge gets introduced. And the movie just completely shifts tonally because now we're in her room and they're asleep and the phone rings and we get the whole breakfast scene and all that. It's an incredibly dramatic shift. It almost feels like, they know we can't take any more at that point. We need somebody has to step in now and try to set things right. This can't go on as it is. It's very well done, I think, in filmmaking terms.
I was just going back to the Gare shooting of the woman in the car. The way that they block the scene is, notice he doesn't just walk up to the car. There is a little bit of a Marge. He kind of aims, like he walks up to the car and he has his gun, and there's a moment where he's making sure he's going to kill her.
Oh, he aims, yeah.
That is really extra chilling because he doesn't just go boom, boom again. Oh man, she's so helpless, and he is
One
ruthless, fucking ruthless.
It's so clear from that scene and the way he moves and does the whole thing that she means nothing to him. That the fact that this is a human life just doesn't even cross his mind as sort of a relevant consideration, even in the smallest way. It just doesn't register.
Yeah, all he cares about is lining up that barrel,
Yeah.
Can we talk about the music?
Yeah.
I know, and for Robert's assessment of Jose Feliciano, and
Hey,
do you know
Jose
the way to San
Feliciano, you got
Jose?
no complaints. That's all
You
I'm
got no
saying.
complaints, right? That's so good. That's a great line.
My main comment was this Norwegian folk tune, which I can't pronounce the actual term in Norwegian, but it's the lost sheep or the lost lamb. And I think Peter and I, we were talking about how, was it, I think it was in Barton Fink where we thought, yeah, was that the film where you and I were saying, the opening theme doesn't, something off about it?
It was Miller's Crossing. It was that
Miller's Crossing. I'm
grandiose,
sorry. Miller, you're
thing
right.
going.
Miller's Crossing. Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. Correct. Miller's Crossing, you and I were saying. And then when we saw Hudsucker, we said, holy shit, this is perfect opening. And I think
Right.
this opening score, and Troy and I have talked about this, is when we do fade in and we see that there's a car pulling a trailer with a car on it through this blizzard, this snow blind situation. The music is what sets the tone for the gravity of like that scene where you're going, shit, something serious is going on. Whereas a different soundtrack, it could have been a comedy, it could have been pedestrian, like every day. So the music, especially in the opening scene.
Imagine putting the Benny Hill theme music behind that. Different movie.
Yes. So this, I think the soundtrack is brilliant, and it's almost like a character in the film. It really determines the way that you are viewing what you're seeing on the screen. And you know, this is what good soundtracks are supposed to do. But I think in this case, it's particularly powerful. The opening shot with that, the way that Carter Burwell does the score, and it's dramatic at the right point. And of course, again, you think, holy shit, what's going on? What is this guy's driving? He's pulling this trailer with a car. Like, what the hell's happening? As opposed to, like I said, any other Benny Hill. That's a really great. That's a great example. But anyway, so I think it's one of the. It's arguably the most perfect opening soundtrack to a Coen film.
Nice. I mean, I wanted to say about Jose Feliciano that, I mean, it's always good to look for where race is in these films, you know, because it's often there, but not quite in your face. Like Lebowski, it took me a couple of screens to notice that, you know, Asia is all over that film, and here, of course, you know, what kind of how does race appear up there in the northern, you know, Midwest, and it's a very white area, not only with the snow but the people. But we've got an Asian guy. What was that guy's name? The character?
Mike Yanagita.
Mike Yanagita, right? So he's a Japanese guy, and then there's Jose Feliciano, and I was thinking, like, that's the way, you know, minorities appear there, is like, you know, kind of briefly. Or like with Mike, he's very much, you know, assimilated, and he's working, you know, following the engineer track within the big companies. At least he's in his mind, he is. But Jose, you know, you might see someone like Jose Feliciano in a nightclub, but they're really at the margin of things. Is there any other people of color in the film? I don't know.
Shep Proudfoot would be.
Shep, of course.
Yeah,
My gosh,
yeah.
we talked about him with
We
his
did.
Legacy
Yeah, we mentioned him
Rage.
earlier. Yeah. Other than that might be it. Yeah. There's not, as you say, it's a very, very white country.
Mm-hmm. But it's there. I mean, there's,
Yeah.
you know, Jose's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So is Mike.
I wanted to mention about the theme, Robert, the opening theme, but of course they do bring that back later on. And Peter, you were just talking about the scene where they do, I think, where at the end when Grimswood is apprehended and the police vehicles are coming in. So it's again a scene of vehicles moving through the snow. And they replay that theme, and it is so stunningly effective. And it's
So
this
effective.
wonderful sort of, you know, full circle kind of thing, right? I think that's part of what gives you the sense that justice has been done, that there's a kind of closure here, that we're returning to the beginning, we're hearing that theme again. It's sort of the signal, you know, this
That
is the end of the
repetition.
main narrative. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have that. We're also trained to recognize those things, whether we, you know, think about it or not. And then, of course, you get a little coda at the end with them in bed, you know, a little afterward. But yeah, I think it's wonderfully done. And it's
It's so
the
nice. Yeah.
theme is so resonant and
Yeah.
dramatic that it really does bring out the sort of tragic elements of this story. It forebodes them in the first case, and then it kind of reinforces them in the second, and it's just so effective.
Robert, what did you think of it was playing a what is it, Burt Bacharach's Do You
Do
Know the
you
Way
know
to
the way
San
to
Jose?
San Jose?
Yeah,
Yes.
in the buffet scene when
Yes.
Marge is going through the buffet, and the music. I mean, maybe like the Hispanic world gets, turned into music in that world. I don't know what they're
Well,
trying to
it's
say.
the second Jose, right? Um,
It's the second Jose. So yeah, do you
yeah,
know the way to Jose? It's two Jose's
Jose
in there.
Feliciano.
Yeah.
I guess it's yeah, it's interesting that the introducing the quote exotic into the whiteness of Minneapolis.
And a Muzak version of it in particular.
The music, that's what happens to it. It gets
Yeah,
music.
yeah, that's how we encounter other cultures.
I don't know much about the demographic of Minneapolis. Isn't Prince from Minneapolis?
He is,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
He is, definitely is.
Interestingly enough, yes.
Yeah. And today there's a lot of Somalians, I believe, in Minneapolis.
Mm.
But I don't know about 96 though, but certainly Prince. Yeah, it's pity that Prince didn't appear somehow, or at least Prince's music. That would have been great.
Well, the symbol he was using as his name, right? Doesn't that appear in the credits as that's given as the
Does
Oh
it?
yeah,
name?
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
given as the name of the actor. It's not true, of course. It wasn't Prince, but the guy who we were just talking about, who fled from the car and left the girl behind, he was played
No
by.
way.
That's
Oh,
it.
that's a
Check the
good
credits. Yeah, yeah. No, it's
Good
crazy.
catch.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, good point. Yeah.
So it makes sense. Could have been Prince. I mean, other stuff is lies in this film, so why not that?
What about the title? The Lost Lamb. Do you think that is Jerry the lost lamb? Who left the flock? Who's wayward? Is it? There's so many people it could be.
Gene? I don't know.
I would vote for Gene, only because the more I watch this movie, the more I think it's about Gene. And
The wolves got her. Yeah.
yeah,
Right
yeah.
in the woods. They took her to the
And,
woods.
and then everybody forgot her. Marge never even mentions her, I don't think. I mean, she's aware, I'm sure, but she's
She says,
she
wasn't
doesn't.
that, on the floor back there,
Oh,
with
she
just
does. I think
quick
that's right,
reference.
because she
Yeah.
saw her body. So yes, so she does
Yeah.
get mentioned by Marge once. That's true.
Using Gene as a segue, do you want to head into our cinematic slash plot slash character observations?
I'd love to start with one which relates to Minneapolis, which we were just talking about. A small point and then a somewhat larger point. The small point being that at one point, it's the just before the confrontation again between Wade and Carl, when Jerry is leaving to follow them because Wade has now screwed up his plan. He says to Scotty, "If Stan calls, tell him I went to Embers." So, of course, we know Embers, right? Embers will show up later on in A Serious Man. I believe it was. I looked it up. Embers was a chain, so it might not be the same Embers, but Embers, I think, is
Wow.
where
Wow.
Cy Abelman meets with Larry Gopnik, right? And they're and then he says to Larry, "Embers is no place for formalities," right? It's I should get the exact line, which I won't have it when we watch that film. I'll get it. But of course, these two films are set in the same area, roughly. A Serious Man is set in a suburb of Minneapolis or St. Paul. I'm not sure which, but it's certainly in that area. And of course, this is where the Coens grew up. So I think there's something very interesting about them setting setting these two films in this part of the country. Uh, when we were talking about minorities and so on in Minneapolis being so white, it occurred to me that I don't think there's any Jewish characters in Fargo at all. A Serious Man is all about a Jewish community, and all the main characters are Jewish. It took them a long time to sort of come around to make that film set in their hometown. Visually, the two are so different, because they're set at different times of year and so on. But if we look at A Serious Man and we think, well, in a few months' time it's going to be winter, that's presumably what it's going to look like. They're also set in different eras, but it seemed to me that, and again, this goes back to the nihilism theme, that in a way, both of these films are looking at the heartland, looking at the Coen's childhood home in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that area, as a very kind of nihilistic place. I get this visual sense for Fargo of very tiny figures struggling in a very large landscape. And metaphorically, at least, that's the sense I get from A Serious Man. And of course, if I think about the very final shot of A Serious Man, it's very much that. It's very much very small, vulnerable human characters looking at a big, frightening, indifferent universe. So I think there's some very interesting resonances between these two films, even though, as is so often the case with the Coens, if you look at the surface stuff, how they feel, how they look, and so on, they couldn't be more different.
I mean, I think there's a way cinematically I'd want to try to tie this to the Wizard of Oz in the sense that so this is setting up Kansas. You know that in the next film we move to Oz, we move to the Emerald City, and there's the reference back to Fawn Knutsen's home on Moorhead, Minnesota, in the Big Lebowski, which I think connects. Uh, and it was a very in the picture. Remember, it's a black and white picture, and it looks very desolate, just like this film. So I want to think of that as the background to this is this is Kansas, and we're going to move to the Emerald City next time. And of course, you made the call before, Robert, that there's the way that this is playing with noir films. It's playing with cop dramas. It's addressing family in the later Reagan era. By the way, which was the Prince era too. I mean, the whole Minnesota sound was that same thing. But anyway, that's a quick thing I wanted to say. There's certainly a lot more cinematic stuff going on.
I had just a few to throw in. One is it's interesting to me that out of 6 pictures, this is the second one that features a policewoman. I don't know what that says about the Coen brothers, but I think that 1/3 of their films features a policewoman. The other thing I had noted is in this opening shot, the first thing we see that's a living thing is a bird. And contrasting that with Barton Fink, the last thing we see, the living thing we see, is a bird. Only the bird is going into the ocean, and this bird seems to be
Nice.
like the phoenix coming out of the white the snow. The other thing I wanted to mention is this trope of the detective who appears naive or even simple-minded, and how much we love that. I'm thinking about Columbo.
Columbo is so good, yeah.
One of the things we love about Columbo is he presents as a kind of bumbling fool, but that's the conceit. And I think part of that is going on here with Marge, in that we know as we're watching the film, it's clearly revealed to us that she is a top-rate detective. But we love, I think, that she presents as just a simple Midwestern pregnant wife who just happens to be a cop, when in fact she's a Sherlock Holmes in a way, right? So I think that's a kind of cinematic character that we love. And I don't know why, but I know that I love to see those kinds of faux bumbling detectives solve the case, right? Because they overcome the arrogance of especially Columbo. Every show he was, that trope where he'd say, okay, well, that wraps it up. Oh, one more thing. And then that would be the moment where, and the thing is yeah, so, we know that they figured it out. Whereas that's something we don't see, is that Marge in advance with Columbo and with Sherlock Holmes and other detectives, they figure out the whole thing in the beginning and they just have to build the case. But Marge is earnest, I think, in the sense that we're watching her actually solve the case in real time. So I think that kind of makes her.
Yeah, that's noir-esque, yeah.
Yeah.
What about a comparison with Clarice from Silence of the Lambs? I mean, so she's confronting a kind of nihilistic, killer too, and she's a cop. What, in a way, and she's not, there are people, by the way, who think that this film is cruelly condescending to Midwesterners. I don't know if I follow that, but I know that some people in Minnesota found it that way. But you would never say that about Clarice. Clarice, I think, works with the guy, but to the nihilist to get rid of another nihilist, and it's her intelligence and determination. I guess you could say it's her ability to confront the void and finally overcome it. Whereas you do get this feeling like that Marge does that, but she doesn't know what she's getting into until she finally gets out there to face the wood chipper. Whereas kind of Clarice knows it going in. She kind of realizes she's been told who this guy is, and she's prepared. Whereas Marge has a kind of education that happens to her in the face of this kind of nihilistic violence and murder.
Yeah,
I don't know
good.
how else you might compare those two.
I think it is a nice analogy, and I think you're right that maybe there's a similarity with Marge in that.
What was the theme called? The Lost Lamb?
The Lost
Yeah,
Lamb.
the Lost Lamb. Yeah. There you go. Silence of the Lost Lamb. But I think Clarice and Marge, they both know in the abstract that the world could be as dark as it is, but it's not until they actually experience it. That famous scene when Clarice is in the dark, walking with her gun, and she's like
Oh
literally, but also
yeah, yeah.
figuratively trying to escape the darkness. And what an intense scene. But
I
so
know
maybe
that's
that
like the
might
white
be a
out there.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah, good. That might be a similarity between them because they once they experience it, when she experiences, uh, what was the guy's name? There's Hannibal Lecter, but
Yeah, it
that
was
other
Buffalo
guy,
Bill. They
Buffalo
called the
Bill. Yeah,
killer.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I wanted to say, unless Troy, you wanted to jump in on that Clarice thing. I wanted to say I had asked Troy about two quick things. One is I had read that the reason why Jean has a hood on throughout most of the film is that that's not the same actress. The actress, she had some other commitment. She could only shoot for like a day or two. So the stand-in had to, they kept the hood on because that was someone else.
Was that right?
Yeah. But going back to the wood chipper, and I raised this with Troy. My question is, why is he putting Carl in the wood chipper? Why doesn't he just axe Carl, grab the shit, and take off? Why did he feel compelled to destroy the
Oh,
evidence?
great.
Is he going to take Jean and put her in the wood chipper? The thing is, Guerre seems to me like the kind of guy, he's not that thoughtful. Like, why is he trying to cover up? So I was thinking, I mean, cinematically, it's dramatic to see someone pushing a foot into a wood chipper, but as far as relative to the character, there's something about the wood chipper scene that doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't seem like something he
Yeah,
would do.
that's a great point.
Why is that scene?
I mean, I thought there was some kind of bizarre, maybe stupid, but Grimsner's not stupid, attempt to clean it up. He wants to clean up the scene by eliminating the bodies, and he thinks, well, it's going to snow again, it's going to rain, whatever, nobody will find them. I don't know, but you're right. It's visually, you could say it's like I mean, The Shining, the red rum is here, and the blood is coming pouring out now, so that's like all been unleashed in a way. I don't know. Maybe that's the best I can do off the cuff.
Yeah, if honestly, I suspect it is for cinematic reasons rather than plot reasons. I think the Coens have such a great understanding of image, and they knew that this image was just going to be one that would help make the movie. And it is. It's. I remember when the movie came out, so many people were talking about that particular thing. It's a very
Definitely.
brief shot. It's not central to the plot in any way, but they knew it would just grab people, and it would really maybe illustrate more than anything who Grimsworth is. There's the fact that he's willing to do this. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about objectification and the way he makes people into objects. Because he's comfortable with that. He's not comfortable with things that you can talk to and reason with, that is people. He's comfortable with inert objects that you can manipulate. Maybe there's a Kantian point here in a way,
It, it,
He
it
doesn't
does
see
connect
people
into
as
Paul Bunyan. I'm
agents.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and the Paul Bunyan connection. That's true. That he becomes the woodsman out
The
at the
woodsman.
end in the snow working with the wood chipper. So yeah,
And just like
there's a
Paul
lot of
Bunyan represents, colonialism and how it's going to wipe out the
right.
populations
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
He's
Thematically, it certainly works. I mean, if you're asking me to speculate about what's going on in that guy's mind, boy, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Who knows? But it just seemed for some reason like a good idea, so he did
Well,
it.
we should mention that I think the Coen brothers were inspired by a real life case where a husband killed and fed her body through a wood chipper.
Oh,
So,
that's true. Yeah, I remember.
so there is that case, and it is cinematically dramatic. I mean,
Mhm.
again, I hate to reduce it to this, but it seems like I can imagine the Coen brothers going, let's have him put the body through a wood chipper. It's never been done. As you mentioned, Troy, when people talk, many people who, when they think of Fargo, they go, oh, that wood chipper. It's sort of one of the hallmark scenes of the film that
Definitely.
people remember, because it's so gruesome.
Of their whole careers, really.
Yeah, yeah. I think it'll be one of their enduring images. Crazily enough.
I mean, do you think so? I think it's brilliant, but I can see how some might say, like, no, this is just too far, it's too perverse. But like, I think it was brilliant in a way how like they mixed, I sort of alluded to this before, like comedy in with it. I mean, it's really a comic
Hmm.
scene as well as a horror, a horrible scene in the sense when he comes out of the cabin, he's got to put his little flappy hat on, and he's in his damn, long underwear. And then just the way that foot is sticking out of the top of that thing. I
It,
mean, I don't know about you, but I had to laugh.
oh,
No,
it's
It's
funny.
just
it's
great.
hilarious.
And they do a lot of that in this film. They push the grotesque humor. They're getting us to laugh. We're not sure we should be laughing. I think we haven't really talked about this, but I actually think it's quite important to this film that one of the things that one of the essential parts of experiencing the film is there's so many moments where you don't really know if you should laugh or not. And a lot of the time you do,
Yeah.
and then you think, wait, should I be laughing? Is that right? It just keeps pushing us on that. So and so I think they're kind of making a point about empathy, as I made earlier, but at the same time, there's no doubt that there's places where they push for laughter and are probably going to get it, where probably what's really going on is not funny, or at least it certainly wouldn't be funny if this was real people. So
I was thinking about Nietzsche and nihilism. And if anybody knows nihilism, of course, it's him. And in The Birth of Tragedy, he talks about the way art allows us to look into the void without, succumbing to it ourselves. And maybe
mm,
that's what comedy does in this sense here.
There is a certain gallows humor that goes through the Coens.
Yeah.
That's another scene that I think I found that people laugh at, which is actually horrid, but I laughed at in Burn After Reading when Brad Pitt pops out of the closet and he
oh,
gets shot right between the eyes.
it's so
For-
awful, but
it's
right, the
awful,
way
but
they
it's
filmed
funny.
his clownish face just popping out of the closet like that, it's hilarious. Visually speaking, it's completely hilarious, and yet, yeah, it's awful. But look at the history of cinema. Look at early silent film and stuff. So much of what people laugh
Sure.
at is people
Yeah.
having accidents and pratfalls, and I mean there's a lot in Freud. I'm sure if we went to it, that we could find out about why it is that we laugh at people falling down and getting hurt and so on. But the whole idea of the body being reduced to a thing, I think he writes about that. So there again is that objectification thing. We find that humorous.
Yeah. The subject turns into an object.
Yeah.
One last thing I was thinking about, and I don't know if I'm grasping at this point, but in the film there are many pairs, right? There's Jerry and Jean, there's Carl and Gerd, there's Marge and Norm, there's Wade and Stan, there's the Twin Cities, right? So this kind of like there's these pairs that move through the film,
You're so right.
and I don't know what that says about what they're thinking, but I do think that we spend a lot of time with Carl and Garrett in the car. We spend time with Marge and Norm. We see that Wade, it seems like the only person that Wade defers to is Stan. So they have this kind of relationship.
Stan the great man.
Stan the Great, yes. And of course, Jerry and Jean, they're,
Whereas Lebowski's going to be about triads, trios,
Mm-hmm.
oh, right. Good.
Yeah.
But I think one thing we didn't talk about is, or maybe we mentioned it. I think, Peter, you may have mentioned it. But the marriage between Jerry and Jean, I mean, Jean she seems like an emotionally battered woman. Like, God knows what it was like growing up with Wade as your father. But poor Jean, she seems so anxious about everything. And she's cooking and yeah, Dad. And so she seems.
The way that she stirs that spoon, man.
Oh,
she's so-
man. So yeah, you had mentioned this, but I did think about what is the backstory on Jean and what is the relationship between Wade and Jean? And like I said, God knows having Wade as your father. Anyway, so the thing about the pairs, I don't know what to make of it, but I did notice it.
That is interesting. I do want to say one more thing about Gene while we're on that topic. That, as you know, I often think the Coens are making connections with or paying little homages in some way to Hitchcock, and it seems like Gene here is functioning as the kind of central invisible female victim that we get in a lot of Hitchcock films, including some of my favorites, Rear Window and Vertigo, for instance. Both of these revolve around the murder of a woman who basically we never see, or see very, very, very briefly, catch a tiny glimpse of in a flashback or something, right? But she's basically not even a presence in the film, and yet it's her murder that is sort of the excuse for the entire plot. We have something like that here, except the Coens complicate in this interesting way by actually letting us meet her and get to know her just a little as a character before silencing her and wrapping her up and sort of removing her, and yet again still keeping her on screen some of the time. She's been removed as a character. Again, she's been changed from subject to object essentially, and yet she's still present enough for us to actually, as we wouldn't or don't tend to, at least in Rear Window and Vertigo, to actually think about her as a human being and think, wow, this movie is revolving around this terrible thing done to this person who really is a real person, right? Within the fictional world of the film, right? Even though we don't know her very well, we don't have a lot of experience with her, and so on. And so I think, again, there's something very interesting in terms of empathy going on there. And I think we're really, the fact that we're able to witness her degradation in the way that we do and what's done to her is very interesting, I think, what they're doing with this film.
And Troy, there's also an homage to Psycho because she's wrapped when the shower curtain.
Yes, absolutely.
The way that the shower curtain pulls, we get that.
That's right. And structurally, the film is sort of the inverse of Psycho, because in Psycho, a very major female character disappears unexpectedly partway in. And in this film, the major female character appears somewhat unexpectedly after about a third of the film. That's very interesting.
Have we talked? I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, just was this is changing the topic. So if you want, but have we talked enough about cars? I mean, so much of it revolves around the Sierra, and of course, there's the car dealership, and there, it's a truck stop and all this. But that Sierra is the first thing you see, and then it's kind of the last thing, sort of. I mean, one of the last things. And she's like, when she finds them, she's not. She's like, there's my car. There's my car. I found my car. I found it. I found it. And so that car seems to have, and then there's the whole thing about, I mean, Wade ends up in the trunk of a car, and the money gets changed in the car. So I don't know.
Carl gets killed because he won't give up the car.
The car,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So,
there's so many. The parking lot attendants that gets killed,
and these are American middle class cars. I mean, these are Oldsmobiles, right? I mean, so it seems to be like there's some way it just establishes the backbone of middle America with these Oldsmobiles and what they carry around with them.
I did just want to mention how they're such masters of the form, and in this film in particular, more so than I recall being the case with the films, at least up to this point. There's obviously great visuals in every film, but this one, there's so many little shots that are basically visual jokes that get a big laugh. I saw this film multiple times in the theater. Every time these could be relied on for a laugh. No dialogue, just it's a cut or it's a shot. I just wanted to mention a few of my favorites. They're all so well done. We mentioned Jerry rehearsing his story before he actually calls Wade, which is so great. But of course, we don't know at first he's doing that. We hear him and we think he's actually on the phone. Then they cut straight to the shot where we see both him and the phone in the shot, and the phone's still in its cradle. And everybody laughs when they do that. The amazing Tonight Show cut, right, where Carl and Gare are in the motel room with the hookers and they're having sex and so on, and then it cuts straight to like how 20 minutes later or whatever it is later on, watching the Tonight Show, you hear the theme. There's a bit of music we didn't talk about, an instantly recognizable bit of music, but again, big laugh. It's hard even to say exactly why that's funny, but it's so funny. I laugh. I still laugh every time I watch
that age,
It is so the behavior, that's what they're going to do. They're going to have these sex with hookers and then watch the Tonight Show. The scene where again, after Wade gets shot and after Carl has driven away and Jerry shows up, timed perfectly, right? We see him from behind. We only see the back of his head. We don't get a clear view of him at all, but we see him. We know he's looking at the body. He's thinking, what do I do? Then we see him lean over, pop the trunk. We immediately know what he's going to do, and everybody laughs. It's hilarious. It's grisly and awful, and it's hilarious. The fact this guy's going to put his father-in-law in the trunk of his car, like that's, how am I going to deal with this situation? It's so funny without a word. And then finally, the last one I'll mention, of course, Carl.
Doesn't he drive home after that too? Where does he go?
He does. We never find out what happens to the body. Somebody must find it at some point, right? It's in the trunk. Yeah, he just drives off with it, presumably. Yeah. And then the last one with Carl burying the bag of money in the snow, and then that wonderful scene where he looks one direction, nothing but snow, and the fence line going to the horizon, looks to the other direction, the same. Again, he doesn't vocalize, right? But we know what he's thinking. How the fuck am I going to find this place? He takes that tiny little red snow scraper and he plants it there, like he's going to see that when he's driving by later on. like that's going to work. It's so stupid, and it's so great. That scene is just wonderful, and again, a big laugh. Every one of these gets a big laugh when you watch it with people in the theater. They're so good at this.
Because it really illustrates like what a no place that is. And and the vanity of trying to overcome that with that little tiny little scraper.
Where am I going to hide this $1 million? I know, I'll drive into the middle of this huge field with no landmarks anywhere nearby, and I'll leave it there. That's
great idea.
Yeah.
Right, and the fact that he's in this barren, snowbound wasteland, and the object that he uses to mark it is a snow scraper. That's even more.
So pathetic.
Yeah, it's so
It's awesome.
Yeah, by the way, I think Jerry drives home with the body because then he comes in and Scotty says that Stan Grossman called twice. That's when he gets
yeah. The
back.
body's in the
Yeah,
trunk.
yeah. It's got to be in the trunk. I'm
Yeah.
sure he didn't stop
I'm
to
going
drop
to
it off
sleep.
anywhere. What would he do with it? Unless he
I'm
has a
going
wood
to bed.
chipper. Right. No, it's still in that car. That's right. He goes to bed.
I'm going to bed.
You know what's interesting to me about that particular scene when Jerry finally shows up to the parking lot, and we see the scene where Wade's there and he pops the trunk, and it is when he pops the trunk, yeah, it's twistedly funny, but but I could also imagine, and I see the Coen, I can imagine again. I like to picture the Coens writing, and they say like, look, let's just have him, just hold on the car, and then he pops the trunk. But you know what I could also imagine that would have been funny is having a scene where imagine Jerry trying to wrangle the body into his trunk. And that just strikes me as that would have been
that would
really
make some good
funny.
blood simple too.
Yeah,
Like maybe he's
yeah.
not even dead. That's what would have been great. Yeah. Just dying still.
It is interesting that they don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, because what the Coens like to do is we've talked about this before, but we see the film, and Troy, you and I were talking about Austin Powers, where Dr. Evil, he's laughing, and then in most other Bond type films, the villain just laughs and then they cut to another scene. But Mike Myers asks the question, what happens when those villains are laughing? Like how long does the laugh go on? How does it end? Right? And the Coens like to do the same thing. What happens when you shoot someone? What happens to all the blood? In most films, the body's just cleaned up. But, with Blood Simple, he's on the floor with that, whatever the hell that rag jacket is. And so I do think that this is a case where how do you get a body into a trunk, especially when you're Jerry and you're lifting Wade? I could imagine a really funny, twisted, funny scene.
Yeah, Wade
but
might have like 50, 75 pounds on Jerry. I mean, that's not
anyway,
light.
that just popped into my head. But one last thing, I just in the issue of Carl leaving the garage, when you look at that the arm, yeah. So obviously Carl just drove through it because it's broken. Why does he have to shoot the guy? Why didn't he just drive through it?
Oh, he doesn't have to. Yeah, it's because Garrett would have just driven through it, right? Carl is so angry and upset because he's just been shot that when this guy asks him to pay the toll, he's furious about it, right? It's expressive. It's the same reason he shoots Wade 6 or 7 times. He doesn't have to. It's because
I agree,
that's who
but
he is.
the guy is a witness. He may have gotten the license plate. I don't know, stuff like that.
I guess he could be a witness. I don't see Carl thinking ahead in that way. He doesn't seem to be that type of plotter, but you could be right. He actually did have a reason in a sense. I just think that he's in a murderous rage. He's going to shoot anybody who gives him the
Maybe
least
he's
bit of
taking
trouble
out
at that
his
point.
anger on the other attendant. Remember at the airport?
Yeah,
That guy gave him
King
it's
clip-on
like,
tie.
I'm
Right?
not going to do
Yeah.
that shit.
Totally. He's already primed by that. And then now he's been shot in the jaw. So, yeah, I totally buy it in terms of his character.
And it does foreshadow the No Country when we come downstairs and the clerk at the hotel is in a similar position.
Yes, that's right.
I love that scene at the airport, by the way, just because
In the parking lot?
Yeah, just like the goofy
great.
look on the attendant's face.
Oh, yeah. That guy's
so
great.
He's great.
Another wonderful Coen minor character, right?
know, right?
A little
That guy's
scene, a few
awesome.
lines, and they cast it and they nail it every time.
And obviously Carl is not from the area because he totally lacks Minnesota nice. No Minnesotan would ever talk to anyone like that.
No.
It would just
True.
And it's only $4 freaking bucks. I mean,
Well, fellas, I think that's about all. Have we exhausted our Fargo analysis, at least
I
for
believe
now?
we may have. I think we've said our piece.
Well, this was the 6th film. Our next podcast will be the 7th film of the Coen brothers. A little known, obscure film known as The Big Lebowski. So,
Oh, I hear that's a pretty good one.
yeah, I got to watch that. I got to finally watch that one.
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll see.
that's what I've heard.
Anyway, well, there you go. Well, thank you to Troy Jollimore, Peter S. Fossil. I'm Robert Jones. Hey, thanks for making it all the way to the end of this podcast. We appreciate it, and we look forward to our next episode.